High above the arid plains of southern Peru, the earth itself becomes a canvas of impossible proportions. Hundreds of colossal figures, etched into the rust-colored desert floor, stare blindly upward. A spider measuring nearly 150 feet across, a hummingbird with a wingspan of over 300 feet, a bizarre humanoid figure waving from a hillside. These are the Nazca Lines, an ancient desert enigma that has defied complete explanation since the first commercial airplanes soared over the region in the 1920s. For decades, the sheer scale of these creations birthed wild speculations, from extraterrestrial landing strips to the lost technologies of forgotten gods. Yet, the truth buried in the dust is far more fascinating than any science fiction narrative. Unraveling this mystery begins not in the sky, but directly on the sun-baked ground. To a traveler walking across the Pampa de San Jose, the lines are almost invisible, appearing as mere shallow trenches, barely a foot wide and a few inches deep. The creators achieved this by removing the dark, iron oxide-coated pebbles that cover the desert, exposing the light-colored clay and sand beneath. Because the region receives virtually no rain and experiences little wind, these fragile scratches have survived intact for over 2 millennia. But a baffling question persists. Why would an ancient culture dedicate immense labor to construct massive geoglyphs, a term defining large-scale motifs produced on the ground, that they themselves could never see in their entirety? To understand the motivation, we must look to the people who carved them. Flourishing between 500 BC and 500 AD, the Nazca culture was a pre-Inca society that thrived in one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. They were master ceramicists and weavers, building complex underground aqueducts to coax life from a barren landscape. They had no written language, no wheels, and certainly no flying machines. The prevailing assumption that primitive tools meant primitive minds led early researchers astray, allowing the true brilliance of this civilization to stay hidden in plain sight. Decoding the sophisticated purpose of these figures requires dismantling the myth that they were impossible to build from the ground. Modern experimental archaeology has proven that the colossal designs could be scaled up from small models using straightforward surveying techniques. By employing wooden stakes, long ropes, and a basic understanding of geometry, a small team could reproduce complex shapes over vast distances. They established a central axis, radiating lines outward to plot coordinates, effectively creating a massive grid system on the desert floor. This was an exercise in rigorous mathematics and spatial awareness, executed entirely without an aerial perspective. The precision of these ancient surveying techniques is staggering. Some straight lines stretch for over 9 miles with virtually no deviation. When researchers analyzed the wooden stakes recovered from the ends of these lines, radiocarbon dating confirmed they originated during the Nazca period. The evidence of their construction methodology was preserved in the arid climate, proving that the tools may have been simple, but the application was incredibly advanced. They demonstrated a profound grasp of scale and proportion that rivals modern engineering. Yet, knowing how the lines were made does not answer why. In the mid-20th century, mathematician Maria Ricca dedicated her life to the desert, proposing that the geoglyphs functioned as an enormous astronomical calendar. She argued that the lines pointed to the rising and setting of significant stars and constellations, helping the Nazca track agricultural cycles. For a time, this celestial theory dominated the academic landscape. The desert was viewed as an immense observatory, mapping the heavens onto the earth. However, rigorous scientific scrutiny eventually fractured this elegant celestial model. In 1968, American astronomer Gerald Hawkins fed the coordinates of the lines into a computer program to test their alignment with the stars. The results were devastating to the calendar theory. The alignments were no better than random chance. With thousands of lines crisscrossing the desert, statistical probability dictated that some would naturally align with celestial bodies, but there was no overarching astronomical system at play. The Great Desert Observatory hypothesis collapsed. With the stars ruled out, investigators turned their attention back to the Earth, specifically to the one resource that dictated life and death in the region: water. The Nazca Desert is one of the driest places on the planet, receiving less than an inch of rain per year. Survival depended entirely on runoff from the distant Andes Mountains, which flowed through subterranean aquifers. Researchers began mapping the lines in relation to these underground water networks, leading to a startling revelation. Many of the geometric lines and trapezoids did not point to the stars, but directly to the sources of water. They intersected with the ancient underground aqueducts known as puquios, which the Nazca built to tap into the water table. The lines were not a calendar, but a map of the most precious commodity in the desert. Furthermore, the immense geometric shapes often sat atop geological fault lines, which channel subterranean water toward the surface. The geoglyphs were intimately connected to the hydrology of the landscape. This hydrological connection fundamentally shifted the understanding of the lines from the scientific to the sacred. Anthropologist Johann Reinhard proposed that the lines were ritual pathways designed to be walked upon during ceremonies dedicated to water and fertility deities. The figures were not meant to be seen from the sky by human eyes, but by the gods who controlled the rain. The act of walking the lines was a form of kinetic prayer, a physical plea for survival etched into the earth. This ritualistic interpretation explains the presence of the famous animal figures known as biomorphs. In Andean mythology, specific animals are deeply associated with water. The spider is often linked to rain, as it is believed to appear before downpours. The monkey and the hummingbird are creatures of the lush, wet Amazon basin, representing the ultimate source of life-giving moisture. By drawing these animals on an immense scale, the Nazca were invoking the spiritual essence of water in a land completely devoid of it. The sheer volume of lines suggests a continuous, evolving ritual practice over centuries. Unlike a single monument built at one time, the desert floor is a palimpsest, a manuscript where newer lines intersect and obliterate older ones. This layering indicates that the act of creating the lines was just as important as the finished product. When a severe drought struck, or when the subterranean rivers shifted, the community would mobilize to carve new prayers into the dust, updating their sacred map in a desperate bid for divine intervention. This desperation ultimately points to the tragic climax of the Nazca civilization. Around 500 AD, the culture experienced a catastrophic collapse. For years, historians debated the cause, but recent environmental analyses have provided a grim answer. A series of extreme El Niño events triggered massive flooding, followed by prolonged, devastating droughts. The very climate they had spent centuries trying to appease had turned violently against them. The tragedy was compounded by their own actions. In their struggle to survive, the Nazca heavily deforested the huarango trees that anchored the fragile desert soil. Without the deep root systems of these trees, the landscape lost its defense against erosion. When the floods came, they washed away the fertile topsoil, leaving behind an unyielding wasteland. The intricate geoglyphs, their grandest appeals to the gods, were ultimately powerless against the combined forces of ecological mismanagement and severe climate change. Even today, the desert continues to yield new secrets. The advent of high-resolution satellite imagery and artificial intelligence has revolutionized the search for hidden geoglyphs. In recent years, researchers from Yamagata University utilized AI algorithms to scan aerial photographs, identifying hundreds of previously unknown, smaller figures carved into the hillsides. These older geoglyphs, often depicting humanoids and camelids, suggest that the tradition began much earlier than previously thought, originating as smaller, localized shrines before evolving into the massive, organized lines of the later period. These new discoveries prove that the enigma of the desert is far from fully unraveled. The lines represent a profound intersection of human ingenuity, spiritual desperation, and environmental vulnerability. They force us to reconsider the definition of ancient technology, proving that monumental achievements do not always require advanced machinery, but rather an intimate, sophisticated understanding of the natural world. The legacy of the Nazca is a silent, sprawling testament to a society that pushed back against the limits of its environment. Their colossal artwork remains a poignant reminder of humanity's enduring drive to communicate with the cosmos, to map the unseen, and to leave an indelible mark on the earth. The lines endure not as a mystery of alien intervention, but as a masterpiece of human resilience, forever etched into the silent sands of Peru.